Hey, welcome to the Week 14 edition of the Waiver Wire podcast. I'm Joe Bartel. Alongside me, as always, Jake Letarski. Getting you set here before we hit the, interlude here. A lot of bye weeks going on, 6 teams, heavy quarterback. Yeah, it's going to be
Wild
insane.
West out there.
Obviously, everyone's competing for a playoff spot as well, too. I know Jake was just talking off air about how he's going to maneuver through his bye week conundrums as well. So we're here to hold your hand through it for the penultimate week before the fantasy playoffs. Stick around as we get you set for that. And welcome to the Tuesday, December 6th edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast, brought to you by No House Advantage. I'm Joe Bartel. Boy, Joe Fartle. That's not a good start.
You burned yourself right off the bat. All right, you're for the rest of the day, Joe Fartle. Okay,
we're good. That's good. You can follow me at JB Fantasy Sports, different name than my last name apparently. And of course, Jake Letarski at RotoJake, running down week 14 waiver wire pickups. Obviously, again, playoffs ramifications. Big time for this week. Also, 6 teams on bye this week. How are you going to maneuver that? How are you going to maneuver the Jimmy Garoppolo, Lamar Jackson injuries as well, too?
For a league that seems to love fantasy and adapt to fantasy, this is about as bad as it's going to get.
Yep.
This is a week of the playoffs for so many teams that are fighting for playoff spots, and you have to deal with 6 teams, 6 very fantasy relevant teams, including the number 1 overall pick in every single draft, and just so many more assets here. We're going to help you navigate around it. I've got a big list of names at each position, guys that are some that you can pick up for the playoffs, some that that will just help you get to the playoffs. So we'll help you out this week.
Yeah, we'll also discuss the comeback by Tom Brady over the last 5 minutes of that Saints game last night. Before we do all that, though, let's get a word from our sponsors. No House Advantage. No House Advantage has changed the game by offering the most dynamic fantasy sports platform available today, playing pick'em contests versus other people for a shot at winning big cash prizes. Download the app, choose a contest, select your player props, earn points for correct picks, and climb the leaderboard for your shot at hundreds of thousands of dollars every week. You can also test your skills versus the house and 20x your entry if you hit all your picks. Bet up to 5 player props, over-unders, or individual player matchups across every major league sport, including NFL, NBA, MLB, PGA, MMA, and NASCAR. Sign up now with promo code NHWIRE. That's NHAWIRE at nohouseadvantage.com, or download the app on the App Store to get a first deposit match up to $25. Make sure to check out No House Advantage today and experience daily fantasy sports redefined. It's not just how you play, but also where you play. You won't want to miss out on this. Okay, there's a lot of content, again, with 6 teams on bye, so we can keep this short and sweet from a Monday Night Football recap, because for 55 minutes, that was one of the worst games of the entire season, and I guess you'd come to expect that with the Saints, who are bad, and the Buccaneers, who evidently are also really bad, but by the way, they have the greatest quarterback of all time, Tom Brady, able to lead them back in that win.
Absolute underachievers, but they were able to get it done here. Yeah, the story of this game can be summed up, real quick. The Buccaneers came down, great opening drive, held to a field goal, right? And then it was garbage for the next 50 minutes. Nothing was going on. Tom Brady was and the Buccaneers were turning the ball over. The Saints could move the ball a little bit. Andy Dalton made some decent third down throws, but they couldn't execute in the red zone, so it was largely field goals. It ended up being 16-3, and then with around 8 minutes left, the Bucs were driving. Brady wanted to go for it on 4th and 10 from about his own 20-25 yard line. Todd Bowles said no. Brady was visibly upset. I thought that rift was going to be the headline of that game. Not so fast here. They managed to get the ball back. The defense stepped up when they needed to. Tom Brady goes down and leads 1 touchdown drive. They kick it, back to the Saints. They can kick away because they had their timeouts. The Saints, there was less than 3 minutes left, but the Saints couldn't burn any clock at all, which was a little bit questionable maybe with the play calling there. I understand you play to win and maybe throw the ball in some situations. That wasn't the case. I mean, they were 3 and out with only, less than a minute taken off the clock in that scenario. Of course, give the ball back to Tom Brady in this situation. We've all seen it before. We know what happens. Of course, if you're like me, if you're a Godwin owner who was jumping up and down thinking they won their fantasy matchup after he scored the game-winning touchdown. Right. Then it gets called back due to a hold from the most holding penalized offensive lineman of all time, who had 2 in this game. So that was a little bit frustrating, but that's the story of the game. Godwin's the top target for the Bucks, 13 targets. Tight end Cade Otton was 10. Only 4 targets. I'm sorry, for Mike Evans. So I thought the broadcast
Marcus Lattimore was not there too. That's
exactly.
The guy that owns Mike Evans. He was not playing for the Saints this week. You had mentioned the not Chris Godwin touchdown also hurt DK prop bet bettors as well too. They had a special out there that if Mike Evans or Godwin had caught a touchdown, it was plus 100 odds.
Oof,
that's tough. Yes, Mike Evans had previously scored a touchdown on every Monday Night Football game he had played prior to that. That's why those stats are stupid to me, because it's a different game every single time, as pointed out by this. The Cade Otton 10 targets is important. He did catch a touchdown to begin the comeback. It was a 1-yard play. It wasn't like Cade Otton did anything special. But getting 10 targets from Tom Brady, especially in that offense, which needs guys to get involved, I think is kind of a critical thing, especially at that position right now.
10 targets, you turn it into 28 yards and a touchdown. But, given that guys like Ertz and Dallas Goedert are still in the top 6 of overall tight ends this season, that tells you all you need to know about the tight end landscape, and those guys are going to be very, very relevant here. I want a quick touch on Rachaad White, Leonard Fournette, because that's kind of been a big story. Rachaad White's been a hot pickup, while Fournette has been slightly injured, and White's even been kind of overtaking him a little bit. But Fournette had 10 carries to White's 9. White had 8 targets to Fournette's 7, and of course White scores the game-winning touchdown. The snap share was about 60-40 for Fournette White. So even if Fournette gets back to 100%, I think White still has that, appeal, and is going to be a flexible fantasy player as we move towards the playoffs. I
completely agree with you. He was getting targets even before the Fournette injury had happened weeks prior, and I think is still involved and was capable in his start as well too for Fournette. So that's crucial stuff here. Also crucial stuff, the 6 teams on bye. I would be shocked if your fantasy team, is not dealing with a bye week ramification in some way, shape, or form. This should be immediate across every team in every league at the moment. So Falcons, Bears, not so much. Yeah, probably Justin Fields, who continues to be
Montgomery,
awesome.
Patterson.
Okay, right. Packers, you probably were having to start these Packers, but you might be doing yourself a favor.
Aaron Jones is one of my best teams all year, has featured Aaron Jones in the starting lineup every single
Christian
week.
Watson is the one that really
and Watson,
big
exactly.
Key, right?
Watson has been a game changer. He's turned one of my seasons around. So
Saints,
those guys are relevant.
Chris Olave, right? Not Alvin Kamara, again, you're saving yourself if you're not playing him. Commanders, Terry McLaurin, but it's the Colts with Jonathan Taylor, the number 1 overall pick. That's critical. And to be fair, we are aware of this to begin the season. And some people, myself included, were saying, well, you get 13 weeks of the number 1 overall player. It's fine. You should be in a good position. Well, it hasn't happened so much with Jonathan Taylor when you're playing him this year. Critical spot. So again, 6 teams on bye, relevant guys across the board for the most part. Specifically, I think you could say there's at least 3 or 4 quarterbacks, maybe super flex especially, that you're having to deal with. And I think that's going to be key because we did have some injuries. Now, first, Jimmy Garoppolo done for the season with his foot injury. I don't know. Brock Purdy looked pretty darn pretty against the Dolphins this past week as well, too, right?
Oh, how long were you waiting on that one? I loved it.
7 minutes, I guess.
I guess he's Mr. Irrelevant. That's what I learned from Jeff and Allen the other day. Last pick in the draft, 25 for 37, 210 yards. 2 touchdowns and an interception against the Dolphins on Sunday. The Dolphins have been pretty bad against opposing quarterbacks. Generally, they find themselves in a lot of shootouts. The reason they have success is because Tua has played better and they're able to keep up. But the thing with Purdy is he's not really much of a rushing quarterback in that offense. He carried the ball 4 times for -1 yard. So I think if anything, it helps McCaffrey the most. But it's a pretty decent rest of season schedule. As of, let's see, I got these numbers Monday afternoon. Tampa Bay was 12th against opposing quarterbacks, Seattle 21, Washington 19, Las Vegas 28, and Arizona 30, but that's week 18, so that's largely irrelevant. Purdy, sure, in 2 quarterback leagues, that's fine. If you need there's going to be some deep 14-team leagues where people hoard quarterbacks where, it could be a plausible start. I don't love him against Tampa Bay this week. And then, of course, you get all the Baker Mayfield rumors, right? Because he's on waivers now. And finally, do we get Baker Mayfield to San Francisco? I don't know. If I were San Francisco, I'd put it out there that you want him, but then actually just pass on him because I think he could be a net negative.
I think it's not breaking news necessarily, but I think it was confirmed the 49ers are not interested in claiming Baker off of waivers.
Okay, so step 1 of my 2-step plan.
Okay. And then
actually, no, the opposite of what I said. Never mind.
I was going to say it might add to what you're saying is that it sounds like the Rams are interested. So maybe the 49ers feigning interest is going to be helpful in terms of the Rams continuing to have a bad record. Because I don't Baker Mayfield's better than John Wolford and Bryce Petty, or their third string guy. But like,
sure,
he's not. Baker Mayfield's not that much. If Baker Mayfield is picked up by the Rams, I will not be playing Baker Mayfield at all, even in the Superflex.
Exactly. And the other thing is, I wouldn't necessarily expect the same from Purdy, because, you know, teams are going to have a good amount of film on him now, you know, as opposed to just kind of guessing in the middle of the game, you know, against an already average defense doing that. So I'm not as high on picking him up as I am on a guy like Tyler Huntley, even though it's only a 1 week type of thing, maybe more than 1 week, right? So Lamar Jackson suffered a knee injury against the Broncos. He left the game. He didn't come back. The offense stagnated for a while, and then Tyler Huntley kind of led the game-winning drive there. So, you know, he's got it, and we've seen Tyler Huntley have plenty of fantasy success in the past. Now, you could argue that the receivers or the weapons aren't quite as great, but Mark Andrews is still around. You've got you've got a slew of running backs that are all capable back there, and he can run a little bit himself. So we don't think the Lamar Jackson thing isn't season ending, but it seems to me like he'll be out this week. Again, we don't know for sure on a Tuesday, but if John Harbaugh's calling him week to week, and he's already said he's less likely to play Sunday against the Steelers are a decent matchup for opposing quarterbacks. I think Huntley is arguably right up there with one other streamer that I'm looking at.
So the Huntley thing is interesting. I don't know if you remember this from last year when the Ravens played the Packers, but Lamar Jackson left that game. Huntley came in, just was dynamite, right? And I think I led 2 consecutive scoring drives to make that game competitive and almost beat the Packers. And I came away convinced.
38.1 fantasy points in that game against the Packers.
Huntley had 38?
38.1. Okay, I think our default thing is maybe a little bit generous, the 20-yard passing. It might not take away. But yeah, okay. So
Huntley, or I'm sorry, Lamar had missed time either to COVID.
Yeah, exactly. So he played 4 of the last 5 weeks last season. 22, 38.1, 15.3, and 14.3.
So those last 2 are the key part of this. And I'm going to go back to the Packers one for a second. We thought, man, that's a pretty good backup if nothing else. Maybe could be, I thought, a low-end starter. I actually have him in a league where we have 30 roster spots, and I was essentially backing up Lamar Jackson. This guy could maybe be a starter at some point. Yeah. The Ravens ended up keeping him around this offseason on a restricted contract. Fine. I think what we learned is actually the Packers' defense is horrendously bad, aka the season, and that the Huntley production, which has largely been clouding my mind as to why he's a good quarterback, is clouded. Or I'm sorry, is a little bit the data skewed in that sense.
So here's the dilemma that we're going to run into. A ton of people picked up Mike White after he looked good, and he had a pretty good matchup against the Vikings, had a decent fantasy day here. So now you're looking at, okay, do I start Tyler Huntley or do I start Mike White this week, who's playing the Bills? Or if you have one of those 6 quarterbacks and we're streaming. So that becomes a really tough decision here. I mean, do you take Huntley against the Steelers or White against the Bills? And I think I'm leaning Huntley on that one.
I think I'd go elsewhere. I know we have 6 teams. Elsewhere. I'm not going to do either one of them. That's
I've got a couple other options here for you.
I mean, let's go.
So we can touch on the other 2 quarterback things later, but Jared Goff is still 50% rostered. I think he is probably the best option out of all 3 of those players, because he gets a home game and he gets the Vikings, and the Vikings, as you saw against the Jets and against the Patriots, on Thanksgiving, they made Mac Jones a fantasy relevant quarterback. They made Mike White a very fantasy relevant quarterback. Jared Goff has actually got some weapons that are continuing to emerge. I mean, we all know about Amon-Ra. DeAndre Swift is getting healthier and starting to take over. DJ Shark is back, getting healthier, expanding his role every week. Jameson Williams is around, apparently, as a special teams gunner. Yeah, we can talk a while about that decision. But in any case, Jared Goff is only 50% rostered, and I would go out and put a bid for him immediately. I think he should be rostered and possible starter, if you're relying on, Rodgers you're probably not relying on, but Mariota you could be, Dalton, Heineke, Fields. Fields is the biggest quarterback. That totally whiffed over my head because of the Bears. Who Fields, again, not to get too sidetracked, but decent looking pocket passing day against the Packers. That's getting overlooked a little bit. So, but anyway, if you were lucky enough to stumble on Fields and you need another guy, I'm looking for Goff. I'm looking for Huntley. And then, maybe Mike White's in the mix here, but I'm also, I would still take Mike White over Purdy, over whoever starts for the Rams, over Kyle Allen for the Texans, who's starting now 2 weeks in a row over Davis Mills. I'd take him over, just again, bad matchup against the Bills to repeat myself, but would take him over Baker Mayfield, where whoever he gets claimed. I'd take him over Skylar Thompson in Miami if Tua has a setback.
Yeah.
He left the game and he returned due to an ankle injury. So that's another 2 quarterback guy. But like I said, I think I'm ranking him Goff, Huntley, White as your streamers.
I know the
week.
Dolphins had said with Tua that he could have come back to play if the game was competitive at all. Now it was Tua's fault that the game wasn't competitive. So there is that as well too. I'm not
22, all right.
Yeah, Skylar Thompson is not even a pickup in my mind in Superflex or anything like that, unless we get some crazy information that Tua is
exactly. I'm just running down the 2 quarterback list.
You had missed a QB that I actually think I find more valuable than Jared Goff, and that's Ryan Tannehill against the Jaguars.
Yeah,
I actually am totally fine playing Ryan Tannehill this week for the same reason that you meant with Jared Goff. Like, the Lions decimated the Jaguars defense. They haven't been good all season long, and teams have been committed to stopping Derrick Henry over the last couple of weeks, which has meant Ryan Tannehill is passing the ball more. Do the Jaguars have the personnel to stop that? No, probably not. So maybe it's more like Tannehill throws for 200 yards and a touchdown or whatever.
Yeah.
But if you have Lamar Jackson or Justin Fields and are needing to replace a QB, I don't mind Ryan Tannehill over Jared Goff, to be honest.
Oh, yeah. I don't know if I do that for a couple of reasons, because this is a run-first offense when it's having most success, and especially after they build any kind of a lead. So it'll be the Derrick Henry show, number 1, I believe. Number 2, the emerging weapon of Tannehill, Treylon Burks, who, he was our darling on the waiver wire, at least my darling for the last couple of weeks. Of course, it goes out and takes a dirty hit on his first 25-yard touchdown, can't come back to the game. He's now in concussion protocol.
Oh, okay.
Tannehill's back to Robert Woods and Westbrook-Ikhine as his top 2 receivers, with Austin Hooper and another Chigi Okonkwo, who maybe we'll mention a little bit later in the show. But it's a lack of weapons, and I don't love the game flow for Tannehill. I did put him on the list as someone to consider. I mean, you could say the same thing about Mac Jones, who's only 13% rostered. He's at Arizona. That Arizona defense hasn't been a whole lot better. And, we saw Mac Jones excel. Hey, he had a 25-point fantasy day against the Vikings. Similarly bad, if not worse, pass secondary in Arizona. So
that's a good point. I guess I'm
Mac
so
Jones
low
is thrown in that conversation too.
Yeah, I'm so low on the Patriots overall, but they have better skill guys,
Yeah.
more consistent options if they are choosing to pass the ball. That's fair. I'll hit you with a quarterback question right now because I think it's relevant. Jeff Johnson's asking. He has both Lamar Jackson and Deshaun Watson. I think that's the key part of this equation is Watson, how bad he looked in his re-debut. Does he drop anyone of this group? So Josh Palmer, Pickens, Latavius Murray to pick up either Kirk Cousins or Jared Goff?
Josh Palmer, Pickens.
It's a 10-team league, and
why don't you just drop Deshaun Watson for Goff? I think that's the move.
Or even Kirk Cousins, right? I mean,
how's Cousins? I guess if it's a 10-team, Cousins might be available.
Cousins against the Lions seems like a no-brainer.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
I'd drop Watson for Cousins and throw some fab on that if you can. That would be a waiver claim.
I wanted to make sure that you were. So I know how I feel about Deshaun Watson rest of season. And I said for sure he was not going to be a QB1 this week when he came back against the Texans. And I got laughed at by a lot of people on that. And lo and behold, he was very bad. So do you think Deshaun Watson returns to normal? Because that would be the kind of crux in this argument.
I think Deshaun Watson will be a serviceable, fine starter for the rest of the season if you have to use him. I'm not quite as low on him as you are. But the thing for me is, we've seen what Kirk Cousins has done. Like, there's already a reasonable floor, a much higher floor with a little bit of a ceiling there. So, like, are you holding on to Watson, hoping he turns into what Cousins has been doing, a 20-point-a-week guy roughly? Or do you just grab the guy is a 20-point-a-week guy already? So, Cousins is the man, especially in the matchup this week. I think I'd drop Watson.
Okay. All right. That's where I'm at as well, too. I would definitely have Cousins.
Also, Palmer, as good as he's been, if Mike Williams is back, I know he's back on the practice field.
Right.
If they get back to full strength and they have Mike Williams and Keenan Allen and double-digit target Austin Eckler, I'm not sure Josh Palmer has a roster spot in a 10-team league. I'd have to look at the rest of the receivers. But if you were desperately clinging on to Watson, I could let him go too.
I think Latavius Murray is a little bit hard, especially in a 10-team league as well.
Yeah,
but
that backfield's Murray's, I think. So
it is.
Yeah, I would.
We've had this conversation with the Panthers. What's the value of the worst running back in the worst offense in the league? I don't. It's hard in a 10-team league. I think that's really a hard conversation. All right, let's take a word from our sponsors, Blue Wire. Again, for the video audience, we'll be right back. Obviously, the audio audience will stick around a little bit longer, and we'll discuss these running backs again. Quarterback was more deeper, but the running back's kind of the key here. So we'll hit the break here. Okay, so we're back, and last week we had a whole bunch of conundrums at running back, whether it be the Steelers, Jets, Josh Jacobs, and really what ended up happening was Zonovan Knight and the Jets overall.
Pretty much everybody played. We were worried about ETN. He played. We were worried about Josh Jacobs. He played. We were a little worried about McCaffrey, not necessarily in a sense that he wouldn't play, but that he was banged up a little bit. We were worried about Najee Harris, Jalen Warren, and all those guys ended up playing, except for Michael Carter of the Jets, which made Bam Knight the play. And I still think that at 47% rostered, after he goes out there, has 100+ yards from scrimmage, he could be the elite pickup. But the one thing making me say not so fast, despite a 55% snap share and 15 carries, despite that, he gets the Bills this week, which is what we just talked about with Mike White. It's going to be a tough matchup here. This is a run defense that can pretty much stop the run with their, front seven, front six even. They're talented enough up front. And then game flow could easily get out of hand here, although the Jets have been competitive. So Bam Knight is up there at the top at 47%, but I don't think you can expect a lot this week. Now, a lot of people are going to have no other choice because of, Bymageddon. Yeah. I guess we'll call it again, Bymageddon Part 2. But he's definitely up there. He's the only one out of the group last week that really seemed to take control. And even that could I don't remember seeing Carter to IR or anything like that. So, and it was a low ankle sprain. Yeah, not the high one. So, and even that could get ruined by Carter coming back here. So I don't know if Bam Knight's a home run play, but he is definitely startable.
From one conundrum to another, let's talk about the Seahawks backfield. I know I'm bouncing around the play sheet.
Oh, yeah.
That's fine.
Got it. That's fine.
So Kenneth Walker left the game with what appeared to be a serious ankle injury, although I think the Seahawks had positive news to the extent, however.
I believe they called it a foot strain, which is like a ligament being extended.
Okay.
It's something like that. Again, correct me if I'm wrong if the doctors are out there. A few classes shy of my medical degree there, but a strain
That's
is
vintage Jake line there.
Exactly. But yeah, a foot strain and not a high ankle or a low ankle sprain or anything. So he hasn't necessarily been ruled out yet this week is what we know.
So Kenneth Walker leaves the game. Okay, so they already had their third string guy, Travis Homer, not play. He was inactive for this contest due to an injury. So you have DJ Dallas, who's been serviceable at the time, gets 10 carries, 37 yards, also leaves the game. Then he had Tony Jones, remember back with the Saints last year as a guy that kind of filled in. He steps in. Okay, good depth. No, he gets hurt as well, too. So then they had to trot DJ Dallas back out to end the game, even though he was banged up. This is a key thing to me because they played the Panthers. Theoretically, if you're using the Seahawks offense, they are going to be predicated on the run against a bad defense, although they're better up front than they are in the secondary. There's a valuable starter in this group. I don't know who it is, and that's the problem.
Exactly. Chances are you don't have 3-4 open roster spots on your team to grab all three and see what the heck happens here. So this is one where I'd maybe let somebody else guess and then watch really closely the Thursday, Friday injury reports and see if you can snag somebody for nothing once you get a little bit more information on the situation here. Let's see here. I've always kind of liked Travis Homer a little bit, what he's been able to do. He hasn't really been given the type of opportunity, but I think he's talented enough to actually make an impact if against this Carolina matchup here. He's talented enough to make a pretty big impact if he ends up the feature back in any way. If all these guys are questionable, if all these guys end up inactive, I'm talking Walker, Homer, Dallas. Tony Jones is your guy by default. I don't think his ceiling is as high as someone like DJ Dallas or Travis Homer, but because 7 carries for 14 yards didn't actually do a whole lot, but he did get targeted 4 times, which is interesting and noteworthy there. So this is a wait and see for me all around. I just named all the names, but I'd be lying if I told you player A or player B is definitely going to suit up and be the stud on Sunday. This is just we need more information, so you're going to have to stay tuned throughout the week.
The one of the few unfortunate parts of doing the Tuesday show is that we just don't have a lot of information on these types of scenarios. How about a W for you, Jake? Yeah, James Cook actually looking pretty darn good Thursday, and I think a lot of people will forget about it because it was so far away. But he ended up splitting the backfield almost split for split with Singletary, and I kept looking during that game where's Singletary? Is he hurt? No, James Cook was dominating, which against the Patriots defense means something.
Yeah, people will definitely forget about that because Singletary kind of salvaged his fantasy day with a touchdown. So in terms of ultimate fantasy score and productivity, it was about equal. But James Cook's only 24% rostered out there. The Jets are a decent enough matchup that he could be successful at. And to go into specifics on the numbers, Singletary 44% snap count, 42.7% for James Cook, who actually had one more carry than Singletary, 14-13, and he had 6 targets to Singletary's 2 targets. I think at this point, even though Hines was out there 30.7% of snaps, I think that's a little bit skewed because of his special teams and return work. There, he only had 2 carries, so I'm not worried about Hines sneaking in here. And he lost 3 yards on his 2 carries anyway. Singletary did take 10 of the 11 fourth quarter snaps, so that could be a little bit noteworthy, but also that game was starting to get out of hand a little bit. And prior to the final quarter, again, I'm pulling all this from Jerry's backfield breakdown. Great stuff here. Prior to the final quarter, Cook had 48% of the snaps, while Singletary and Hines are both at 36. So number 1 offense in the league. They're letting the rookie loose a little bit. I think you can pretty safely go out and pick him up and start him. Empty the rest of your fab if you have to. If you have any left, use that first waiver priority, because I know a lot of people, it's win or go home this week, and It's basically like the playoffs. And after the Jets this week, 13th against opposing running backs, so above average, but not a devastating matchup. Miami is 14, and he's got the Bears week 16, the championship semifinals, who are 29th against opposing running backs in standard formats, and then the Bengals are another middle of the pack team to finish it off with. Even in a backfield split, if the touchdown variance goes his way a little bit, we could have a league-winning asset here.
Yeah, I could absolutely see that. I mean, there was a reason he was drafted in the second round. Talent, right? I was a little bit lower on that than you, certainly, but if the Bills are willing to use him, that matters, because I still think that offense is one of the best in the league, and truthfully, they are one of the better teams in the league, so they should be in a spot to let Singletary or James Cook run out the end of the fourth quarter. That's If you're to say one team is going to consistently do that the rest of the season, it's the Bills, even in a tough set of matchups, more or less, that we had mentioned. Is there anybody else that you really want to talk about? There's a couple.
There are a couple guys that are right at the 50% line. I know we've been, and myself has been Cam Akers bashers and Kyler and Williams supporters. But if you take last week into account, we have that one wrong, and Cam Akers is only 46% rostered, but then he goes out there and gets 71.9% of the snap share, 17 carries compared to 3 for Williams, 1 target. I believe he also scored twice. So he scores twice, gets 17 carries, 72% of snaps. That's RB1 territory. I think Akers is a name that you should type in before any of those guys that we mentioned. Akers, Cook is going to be interesting because Cooks just has far better team, but seemingly less competition for touches. So I have to hit on Akers. Another guy who I know I've been hard on this year, he's the classic, doesn't really pass the eye test for me example, is Tyler Algier of Atlanta. But the thing with him is he went and outsnapped Cordero Patterson this week. I was playing against Patterson in one league, and he has like 0 points in the first quarter is done. I'm thinking, what the heck happened here? And it's because Algier is getting the bulk of the snaps, at least 52% compared to 46%. So it's a slight bump. Patterson actually got 1 more target. None of them were targeted in the passing game, if I'm looking at these right stats correctly here. Actually, no, they were targeted. That's an error. Never mind. Algier 5 passes for 16 yards, Patterson 7 for 37. But in any case, that's noteworthy enough usage for me. So I mentioned that because he's still at 45%, and unfortunately, though, I believe they're on a bye this week, so that's why he kind of gets bumped down. And then a couple last quick notes here. Jordan Mason is the backup to roster in San Francisco over Tyrion Davis-Price if you're looking for that McCaffrey backup. And last but not least, if you have the luxury of not suffering through bye week Armageddon and can stash a guy, Khalil Herbert is down to 39% rostered, and he's looking at a week 16 return. He expects to be back this year. That's when he's eligible. Sure enough, the fantasy championship semifinals for most leagues. Again, if you can stomach that, if you have the roster spot to still field the lineup this week, I'd be looking at him too, because he could be helpful down the stretch, especially with all the wear and tear that's going on Montgomery over the last few weeks. Yeah,
I'm just going to reinforce the Jordan Mason call for a second, because we've seen that backfield be tumultuous at times this season. Not that McCaffrey's ever going to lose snaps, but if you're the 49ers, especially not playing with your third string quarterback, there's smarter ways to get these guys involved and set yourself up for the playoffs. I think Jordan Mason might be fine in that system, just like Elijah Mitchell was flexible RB2 territory at times. And I'm not comparing the talent necessarily, but I don't think Jordan Mason is all that bad. And got the workload guaranteed, which is what we need to see in that overall situation.
The snap count, only 18% of snaps, but he did get 8 carries out of that. So that is that's absolutely noteworthy.
Yeah. And you want to talk about the cuts? This is a sad day for my Kyron Williams shares.
Yeah. Again, apologies to anybody that picked up Kyron Williams based on our advice. I think we can agree that we just don't know what the Rams are going to do all year and should stop trying to predict it. Ooh, that was anyway.
The Rams are just so bad, right? I mean,
they're terrible. There's no logic there. And then again, I'm not
really
getting too crazy with these cut lists, but of course you can cut James Robinson. He ain't it. Darrell Henderson's gone. Jalen Warren seems to be a possible cut if you have to. And then Marlon Mack too, and I don't think any of those guys I just named have any business being on a fantasy roster.
Yeah, I would tend to agree as well too. Let's go to the receivers before we do so. Get a word from our sponsors. Pickett. Pickett is a social bet tracking app that takes out all the hassle of tracking your bets and performance over time. Pickett connects to every major U.S. sportsbook and DFS pick and provider such as DraftKings, FanDuel, Underdog Fantasy, Thrive Fantasy, etc. Once you hook up all your sportsbook, Pickett does all the heavy lifting to slice and dice your betting data. You'll get detailed historical P&L graphs, breakdowns by team, sport, player, bet type, and more. You can also line shop for the best odds across your linked sportsbooks to make sure you're getting the most bang for your buck. When your bets are live, you can track the scores and stats of the games you've bet on, as well as get player prop updates from most major player prop markets. No more switching between your sportsbook app and different score apps. By far, the biggest differentiator is that Pickett syncs history and bets from all legal major sportsbook. There's no manual entry required to track your bets. Once you have accounts linked, it's effortless from there. The social feed and community is what turns Pickett from just a bet tracking app to a home for betting, where you can learn from others, see what others are doing, and find verified content to inform your betting decisions. Visit Pickett.com. That's PIKKIT.com to download the Pickett app today. I love that. Let's get that legal sports gambling in Wisconsin so I can use the Pickett app, because that sounds like a lot of fun and a lot of utility in that regard. Last week, we had recommended Treylon Burks got the touchdown, the concussion, like you mentioned earlier. Zay Jones, who I went on Twitter and said in a couple of different spots, go ahead and start, because I was hoping for offense. Well, one team had offense, and it was not the Jaguars, so Zay Jones was miserable despite the targets. Jacoby Myers, Jameis Williams, which I did call at least, Jake. You lost the battle on that one. And then the Elijah Moore and Corey Davis combo for the Jets with Mike White as well too. So let's talk about the Corey Davis part of this, right?
Yep.
I mean, 10 targets is 10 targets, regardless of what you thought in that game.
Yeah, and he's only 13% rostered, so pretty widely available. And, it's clear Garrett Wilson is the wide receiver one there. That's who Mike White seems to enjoy throwing to the most. And, he's found plenty of success. But caught 5 of his 10 targets for 85 yards in those game tying attempted drives, those drives that Mike White had to lead with the game on the line. He was going to Corey Davis frequently. That's one observation I pulled from the red zone there. I think we know Corey Davis, first round pedigree. I remember watching him all the way back playing the Badgers in that bowl game when he was a Western Michigan guy. Corey Davis is good. He's talented. Tough matchup against the Bills, but they are only number 20 against opposing wide receivers. You can kind of explain that stat by the fact that the Bills tend to jump out to a lead in most games here. But even if that's the case here and Mike White's playing from behind, that's only a good thing. I think there is enough room for both Garrett Wilson and Corey Davis to be productive in this offense, and Corey Davis is the most readily available out of this bunch.
And you mentioned now repeatedly Mike White against the Bills this week, but I think there's a reason why we were so aggressively high in him last week, is because rest of season schedule for the fantasy playoffs looks pretty good. Your biggest concern is that Mike White is the starter for the rest of the season. And Robert Saleh was non-committal about that prospect and saying, let's take 1 week at a time. We know for certain Zach Wilson will not play this week. That's all I need to see. Let's just keep that going, because if
Mike White is the starter as long as they're in the playoff hunt. If they're serious about making the playoffs, Wilson doesn't go under center the rest of the season.
Yeah, no, I agree with you.
That's not even that controversial of a statement, I don't think.
We did have a user question about DJ Chark, so I'll kind of let you tee it up, the DJ Chark explanation for the Lions. And again, they played the Jaguars, which is, I think, complicating factors for this. But hey, now 2 straight weeks of
They played the Vikings this week, the Lions. The Titans played the Jags.
Chark played the Jaguars this past week, and that's why revenge game. And
Fair
I
enough,
think that has to be mentioned a little bit. That's what I was trying to get to.
All right.
But I'm impressed thus far with what he's been able to do since the return.
So again, the Lions receiving core, obviously Amon-Ra is number 1. They traded away their top tight end in Hawkinson. They don't really feature the tight end in the passing game much. They feature the running backs a ton. So you got to wonder who is wide receiver 2 there. And I know a lot of the hype was with Jameson Williams last week. He ended up only seeing 8 offensive snaps and 1 target. Again, using him as a gunner on special teams in his first game back from an ACL injury. Questionable. But in any case, you have to look over to DJ Shark, who's definitely lapped guys like Khalif Raymond on that pecking order depth chart, whatever you want to call it there. He caught 5 of 6 targets for 98 this week, and that was after catching 2 of 5 targets for 16 and a touchdown the week before. In the 3 weeks since going back, he's gone from 10 snaps to 49 snaps to 63 snaps. He's gone from 1 target to 5 targets to 6 targets. Shark at 16% rostered is a better play than Jameson Williams right now. I'm not sure I'd be ready to go ahead and throw him as a better rest of season. Obviously not better in Dynasty, but rest of season, it gets a little shaky because I'm curious if Jameson Williams' role expands any, and that's the biggest threat to Shark's usage. But Minnesota ranked 30 against opposing wideouts this week. I love the matchup. DJ Shark is a possible solution to your bye week drama.
All right, so let's fold this all in. A user had asked, do they pick up DJ Shark over Treylon Burks? And again, Treylon Burks suffering concussion after the touchdown catch against the Eagles. You had mentioned it, and I kind of like passed it off a couple weeks ago with Joe Mixon. It feels like concussions really since Tua Tagovailoa and the Dolphins one have been more like a multi-week deal.
At least the 1 week absence.
Right.
Very rarely do you see someone get concussed, have to leave the game, and then come back immediately the following week. You know, and we can thank the whole Tua mismanagement situation for that. But so yeah, I'm not expecting Treylon Burks to come back. Now, again, this depends on your team context. Do you need a wide receiver 3 or a flex this week? Obviously, you go DJ Shark then because we know he's going to play, and I feel a lot less confident about Burks. Just look on Twitter. Look at the hit that he took. It's not pretty. So I don't feel great about Burks playing this week. I feel far better about Burks rest of season though, because he has a chance to become wide receiver 1 in that offense. Down the stretch as the Titans fight for a playoff spot, and Shark, he's on a decent offense. I'll give the Lions credit there. But I do worry about maybe Jameson Williams or, there could be a Khalif Raymond week or someone else in there, or a Reynolds week or something. So there's a little bit of competition there where there's less for Tennessee once Burks get cleared. So rest of season Burks, this week Shark. And speaking of Tennessee, I think we do have to move and discuss Robert Woods a little bit. He's only 34% rostered, and chances are, if you're in a league with active managers, he's more readily available than that. That 34% is only because I think he was drafted in a lot of leagues, in the heading towards double-digit rounds, and then teams just didn't cut him. That's the only reason he's 34%, because he should have been cut long ago. But given this whole situation right now, with Burks out, you're looking at Robert Woods as the top wide receiver, with Westbrook-Ikhine being the other wide receiver there. They've got 3 wide receivers on IR and CJ Board. So not a whole lot going on there. I think the tight ends are going to get involved, which we'll discuss in a little bit here. But Robert Woods is flexible in a way, not body-wise, but you can put him in your flex. I'm sure he's body-wise. He's a professional athlete. But you can put him in your flex spot this week, and he has a pretty good matchup here against the Jaguars. You like the Tannehill matchup here. If you like Tannehill as a streamer, then you got to get behind at least one of these pass catchers. And I think by default, it's Woods. Now, you don't feel great, but by default, it's Woods.
No, I completely agree with you on the Robert Woods call. And I guess we'll continue to foreshadow the tight end that we'll be mentioning a little bit later on. So there's Robert Woods and there's Jahan Dotson, who hit the 5 catches. Finally kind of feels healthy, right? At the beginning of the season, there was 3 or 4 week stretch where he was catching touchdowns from Carson Wentz. Now gets one from Taylor Heineke. However, the Commanders are on a bye this week.
Yeah, exactly. That's a tough part. This is one of those luxury moves here, right? Where if you can stash someone, if your lineup's set, go out and grab Jahan Dotson. Otherwise, I feel like you might be able to wait until next week, because he might be a drop for a lot of teams with the buys. I don't agree with dropping him, but some teams are going to have to, given the bye week situation. But he ended up with 5 for 54 and a touchdown on 9 targets. That's significant. After the bye, he gets the Giants, which have actually been decent against opposing wide receivers. But then he gets San Francisco, the Browns, and Dallas, which are all average to below average against opposing wideouts. So decent matchups rest of season for Dotson. I think he could be an asset, again, if you have the luxury to keep him on your bench.
And I want to be clear, and people are going to ask this question, especially as you and I do our radio hits throughout the week. Hey, it's week 14. What are teams that are ready for the playoffs supposed to be doing? You need to be looking at all aspects of your roster. And if there is a
Big time.
spot that you can cut, whatever. But I'm saying even if you don't play Jahan Dotson the entire fantasy playoffs, you are taking an asset away from your 6 or 8 or whatever teams out there in the playoffs.
Absolutely.
Still. And that is important to me as well, too. Just because they will not play for your team does not mean they are not an asset. And I think that gets lost in the equation, especially as people are really trying to prep for this moment.
I'm fortunate enough to have a lot of Kelsey leagues, but guess what? I'm still cycling through the best tight end available on the waiver wire.
Yes.
Block somebody else who probably needs a tight end. And also, if something were to happen, at least you're prepared ahead of time. I have a 2-quarterback league with Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts, and Deshaun Watson has been on my bench for the last 3 weeks because the biggest threat to my title eventually winning in that league is one of those quarterbacks going down or somebody else getting to benefit from him. So, he's sitting on my bench. You always look at that roster from top to bottom. I think we're past the point where you ever need to worry about 2 kickers and 2 defenses after these buys.
Never.
Yeah. So, we're
this
past
is the
the
most
point there.
2 defense time ever is this. I get what you're saying.
Exactly. But I'm going all the way down to the bottom of my roster. And, someone dropped Van Jefferson in a league and I like him. It's a 12-team league, but I like him enough as the default option there that I picked him up and spent a couple fab, for the second round of waivers that goes through on Saturday. Always making your roster the best it can be.
And to be truthful, I think this week actually might be challenging with the 6 teams on bye and theoretically most teams competing, but have that same mindset for next week too, because next week you're going to have less teams overall. The playoffs will have been decided and theoretically less teams will be interested in the waiver wire. Just keep that mindset in mind as you continue on throughout the fantasy playoffs. Real quick for these other wide receivers, Isaiah Hodgins looking pretty good over Richie James. Now, we again are disciples of the Mario Puig portion of RotoWire. Mario has been touting the Hodgins, and I say touting, just like reminding people that Hodgins' prospect profile looking pretty darn good. Now, it's surprising to me that Hodgins is being used in the slot over Richie James, and that might be more of the key part that you want to focus on.
Yeah, James was the thought to be the higher targeted guy, but after Darius Slayton's 92% snap count, it's Hodgins at 80% and James at 52% last week against the Commanders. So he's taking the reins there, and in a similar tier, I guess, if we want to touch on these deeper leagues, Ben Skowronek of the Rams has a shoulder injury. So I guess after Van Jefferson, it's Tulu Atwell who's next. And there will be some leagues where that move becomes relevant. And then, this is just venting as much as anything, but Alec Pierce is only 14% rostered. He caught 4 of 8 targets for 86 yards and a score, a very nice touchdown grab on Sunday night that he readjusted on. And of course, Pittman only gets targeted 4 times and ends up with 16 yards. Not suggesting you drop Pittman by any means, and you're probably starting him if you were lucky enough to have him and still make the playoffs. But Pierce is interesting, but again, bye week, so he's not going to be able to help you right away. And that seems to fluctuate a ton, and it's a below average offense that, the Colts are pretty much out of the playoffs now, so who knows how much longer Matt Ryan goes until we go back to that Sam Ehlinger train. You
have a lot of W's throughout the year, but I think the biggest one, and certainly the one that you can hold over my head the most, has been Donovan Peoples-Jones, who I had a question this week. Do I play Donovan Peoples-Jones along with 5 other guys? And I stupidly said, no, don't play him. Consistently has been a guy that you can use as wide receiver 3 flex every single week, which I never would have guessed.
You just have to remember that last week, half of his fantasy points came on the punt return.
True.
So that's the only thing. Like, I don't feel as much as I like Peoples-Jones, I don't necessarily call him a must start, but this week, if he's on your roster, I think a lot of people are just going to have to play him by default. I don't think he's a must start, given, it seems like Cooper is still the guy with Watson. They didn't pass a whole bunch. They're most successful when they're running the ball with Chubb. But you definitely don't cut Peoples-Jones, but he's around the rest of the season. You might have to start him this week, but I wouldn't call him a must start necessarily, given his usage with Watson.
No, that's fair. All right, let's go to the tight ends. Before we do so, word from our sponsors, Monkey Knife Fight. Football has been back all season long with Monkey Knife Fight, and all the NFL action is there for you to look for. And if college football is more of your speed, you got plenty of that too on Monkey Knife Fight. There's no sharks, no salary caps, and no math. It's just easy to play, easy to win, daily fantasy player props. Join now at monkeyknifefight.com and you get your first game free. Then use promo code RWNFL to get your first deposit matched instantly up to $100. So what are you waiting for? Join Monkey Knife Fight today. So we had talked about Foster Moreau, Jelani Woods. I just don't understand what the Colts are doing with that, but that's fine. Hunter Henry didn't do nearly as much as what you wanted to for starting him. Josh Oliver in his revenge game against the Ravens, not quite as key of a factor. However, I do think there's some interesting candidates. We had the Greg Dulcich reemergence now. Then there's the guy that we've been touting all week, and I'll let you talk about the tight ends Titans, tight end. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so it's a little bit of a long shot, I'll admit this, but Chigoziem Okonkwo, 4 for 5 targets, 68 yards, no touchdowns, but he's definitely a tight end flyer here. And you can make the same case for Austin Hooper, who's only 14% rostered. He had 5 targets as well. Chigi's more likely to be available, though. And remember, like I said, Burks took that nasty hit. I'm not necessarily expecting him to play, but so one of these guys could be useful, and maybe you squeak a red zone touchdown out of it. So that's why we're looking at Chigi. That was the sneaky ad from Alan and Jeff this week.
5 targets in consecutive weeks. I kind of like that as well too. 4.52 40-yard dash because he's a rookie this year. But this is a 6'3" tight end, not like your 6'7s or 6'8s Jelani Woods. So he's more or less a bigger receiver at 4.52. It's not quite as crazy. Still super fast. And we know the Titans use their tight ends all the time in their offense. Like, this is not a shocker by any means. I think if Treylon Burks is out, that might be a start. And you look at the 6 teams across the bye, maybe you're having to scratch on claw with some of those tight ends. I guess the Packers and Commanders, you weren't really using those guys, but Cole Kmet, for example. And I guess the Colts, you talk about that with Kylan Grayson and Jelani Woods too.
Yeah, exactly. So obviously I thought Woods he passed the eye test. He looked fantastic in the Monday night game a week ago. And then of course he's injured. He's limited in practice this week. And they don't really play him until the fourth quarter, which was kind of mysterious in that Sunday night game. And of course, all these Colts guys are on buys anyway, so you can take this with a grain of salt. Woods has the higher draft pedigree. He's a more talented option here. But it was Kylan Granson who had the 6 targets. And Mo Alie-Cox had a pretty costly fumble in that game too. So that could signal a little bit of a changing of the guard here. I mean, Mo Alie-Cox shouldn't really be used outside of jumbo packages and in the red zone anyway. So you're between the 20s tight ends. Both of these guys are back, but Granson is someone that maybe you pick up for $0 and can keep him next year if you're in a league like that, or someone that could possibly serve as a backup here in the playoffs.
Yeah, Granson shouldn't be getting the workload that he does, but the Colts are doing a lot of things that they shouldn't be doing. So if that is, I mean, it's reliable enough. And Granson has been a key factor in that passing attack for however limited it might be. I had mentioned Evan Ingram, and that was at least the fruitful call. I'm sorry, I had a user asked about Evan Ingram, and I had was able to offset not playing Donovan Peoples-Jones for that person. I didn't listen to the dutiful and smart Jake Letarski on that one. But Evan Ingram ended up doing fine in the touchdown. He got a touchdown, I guess you should say, against the Lions. Different scenario, though, most weeks. The Jaguars are not facing one of the worst defenses, and that's where I have some concerns. And Ingram's at 43% rostered, too.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm fine with him, but just like any tight end, he's inconsistent. And speaking of inconsistency, I unfortunately I was so high on Greg Dulcich, and then I dropped him because he's the guy I dropped for Van Jefferson because he came off a week with just like a couple of targets. Yeah. So he was my drop for Van Jefferson. Then, of course, he comes out, gets targeted 8 times, catches 6 for 85 here. Granted, Jerry Jeudy's back, maybe not 100%, but he's around. Right. But also in Denver, you have Cortland Sutton looking at a multi-week absence due to a hamstring injury. And here, I actually, you know how I always say, like, oh, I saw this on Twitter somewhere and I never write it down?
Yes,
this is courtesy of Jacob Gibbs on Twitter here. I'll give him some credit here. Greg Dulcich had a 38% target share and 42% air yardage share in week 13. He is just the second tight end under the age of 23 to record a target share above 35% in a game over the last 10 years. So this is literally historic volume for Greg Dulcich, and their whole, I mean, Hamler's banged up. Kendall Hinton's getting playing time in this receiving core here. It's down to Jeudy and Dulcich pretty much in terms, and then I'm sure Mike Boone's going to get some action. We didn't mention him in running backs, but he'll get a little action out of the backfield here if you need a really, really desperate flex. But after dropping Dulcich last week, I am, even as a Kelsey owner, I'm going to spend a lot of fab to recover Dulcich and make sure nobody else gets him.
That's fair. Let's talk about the defenses real quick. I had to think about it, and I actually ended up re-listening to our podcast. We did, thankfully, recommend the Browns defense as one of the top waiver pickers. 30-point bomb. That was insane. I wish I had listened to my own advice.
Yeah, I mean, we had the Seahawks number 1, and they were serviceable. They had several turnovers, and I picked up the Seahawks for a lot of people. But yeah, the Browns were the big one there, and even the Packers, who we mentioned, had some key turnovers in the end of that game, despite not looking good to start out the contest. This week, the Vikings 45% at Detroit, Miami 35% at the Chargers. I don't like those away teams. What I do like are a couple of home teams here. You can take either side of the Rams and the Raiders, right? Because the Rams are 34%. Will they get Aaron Donald back? I'm not quite sure about that situation. But the Raiders are going to be facing whatever quarterback the Rams throw out there. And the Raiders are only about 17% rostered here. So you definitely have to take a look at him. As much as I like Tyler Huntley, he is the Ravens' backup quarterback, so you could maybe take a look at the Steelers at 28% against their home against Tyler Huntley. And TJ Watt's always capable of making a really, really big play in any given game. So if you're trying to gamble and pick a team that's going to get a defensive touchdown in any given week, TJ Watt's a good tiebreaker when making that decision. So you got to think about that. And then I threw on the Bengals. They're 25% rostered. Again, a home team, a big division matchup. This team is pretty hot, and Deshaun Watson didn't look so hot. So, if you take that into account here. So
that's actually my favorite streaming defense. The Bengals have been better than I would have thought. Trey Hendrickson has just been a massive difference maker for that team. And they're getting back to their turnover ways, which really got them running the playoffs last year. I think the Bengals, Watson did not look good, and I just don't anticipate that changes over a 2-week stretch, right? I mean, 1 week, 2 weeks.
I you don't play football for 2 years. It probably takes a couple of games.
That was my whole thing. Yes.
And now, I'm finally ready to admit that and agree that he won't be so hot off the bat. But you never know. I still expect improvement this week and a little bit more improvement the following week. So, I guess we'll go ahead and see there.
Yeah, tough matchup, like I said, against the Bengals. And I think they're a decent enough defense, but you mentioned a few streamers that kind of work. We actually are low on the questions, so that does it for us. So somebody asked, they snuck it in again under the gun again.
Another lineup question?
Yeah. Mike White against the Bills or Tannehill off waivers. We've touched on that already. I would start Tannehill. I'm not dropping Mike White, though. So I guess that would be the key in this is that I want Mike White for the rest of the season. But if I had an option, extra roster spot,
you can carry them both. I guess I could see a slight lean for Tannehill, but the gap isn't far enough apart where I would be dropping White entirely. It's a slight gap for me, not a huge one.
Okay. No, that's fair. That's the only other question that kind of came in. So thanks, everyone, for listening. Obviously, best of luck in Week 14, likely playoff eligible week for you. We want to have everyone listening again next week for the start of the playoffs for many people. So, again, best of luck with your lineups. And, again, this was presented by No House Advantage. Tune in next week.